At the BRICS summit, they offer their peace. Will Putin agree to it? Is it interesting for Ukraine? What is happening in Kazan? Volodymyr Ohryzko, Ukrainian diplomat and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, 2007 to 2009. Mr. President, glory to Ukraine. Greetings. Glory to the heroes. I'm glad to see you. Turkish President Erdogan arrives at the BRICS summit. Turkey is a NATO country, and Bild reports that Erdogan is seeking Turkey's membership in the organization, which is led by Russia and China. In addition to the Turkish leader, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General also came to the summit. And besides, we see in the video that he is so cute. He talked to Russians and had a meal. Vladimir, could you explain what is going on and why these leaders are in Russia? Well, let's start with the beginning, as they say the other day, and before that, many, many times, Putin was just... to change this world order to another one, because the one that exists does not suit him. He says this quite openly, I think sincerely, saying that the world that exists today does not suit him. What needs to be done to change it? To do this, he needs to destroy the world as it is and offer some option that he believes can be acceptable to most countries in the world. This is, in fact, the main, so to speak, ideological basis for everything he is doing now.
Це ж не тільки війна в Україні, це ж все почалося ще й раніше. Це Грузія, це Сирія, це, власне, формування...
It's not just the war in Ukraine. It all started even earlier. It's Georgia, it's Syria, it's the totalitarian regime in Russia itself. These are all things that he sees as elements of the destruction of this old democratic system. Although, of course, Russia never had one.
Порядку, який сформувався після Другої світової війни. Тому Казань – це лише один з таких елементів, одна цеглина.
There is also the destruction of the international order that was formed after World War II. Therefore, Kazan is just one of these elements, one of the bricks of everything he has planned in this context. He gathers and invites those who, in his opinion, can meet his concept of changing the world order.
Але я вам скажу, ви знаєте, парадоксально може річ, але я би дуже хотів би, щоб, от зараз до тієї кількості країн, які є, приєдналося ще...
But I'll tell you, it may be a paradoxical thing, but I would really like to see 20 more countries join the number of countries that are there now. No more. Do you know why? Because if an international organization consists of 25 or 30 countries, it is no longer effective.
Які об'єднуються в цю структуру, вони вже самі по собі різні, і вони не можуть знайти якогось консенсусу, а тому все перетворюється на прийняття загальників.
It can no longer accept anything, because the countries that are united in this structure are already different in themselves, and they cannot find any consensus. That's why everything turns into the adoption of general theses, general statements, general declarations that don't really mean anything.
Делікатно кажучи, не дуже то дружать. От подивіться, Індія і Китай. Закляті друзі, які тільки і чекають того, щоб встромити...
That's why I'm very glad that completely different countries are getting involved, which are not very friendly with each other, to put it delicately. Look at India and China, sworn friends who are just waiting to stab each other in the back.
Поки що такі доволі аморфні і неструктуровані організації. Боюсь, що ні. А що Росія буде
Competitors are now in all directions. The question is, will they look for some common ground in this rather amorphous and unstructured organization? I'm afraid not, and that Russia will be, so to speak, the leader of this association? No, never in my lifetime. It's just that this year it is chairing the BRICS, and thus organizing some things. China has been looking down on it for a long time.
То питання в тому, чи буде Індія гратися в цю гру, доволі риторичне. І так далі, так далі. Тобто, розумієте, чим строкатіший набір,
And India is still using the opportunities that exist in Russia to make money on oil from that country. And when the situation changes, the question is, will India play this game? Well, it's quite rhetorical, and so on and so forth.
Заяви про якусь там єдність, про якісь там спільні цінності, про боротьбу з сучасним колоніалізмом, і інша оця вся мішура.
You see, the more diverse the set, the less effective any such international structure can be. BRICS will not be an exception. That's why I think that so far these are mostly beautiful statements about some kind of unity, about some common values, about the fight against modern colonialism, and all the other stuff that is proclaimed. But that's all.
З того, що вже відомо, ця заява буде знову ж таки більш ніж загальною. Там не буде
We already know
ні за, ні проти. Там буде про все хороше проти всього плохого.
Росія вже з'явилася, пане Володимире, перепрошую, вже є ця заява, підсумкова декларація, і
that these countries will not be harsh in their assessment of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Moscow's attempts to impose an alternative position have failed. The MFA drew attention to paragraph 36 of the Declaration on Ukraine, where the participants only recalled their national positions, commitment to the goals of the UN Charter, and peaceful settlement. This is exactly what we were talking about. This means that such a set of participants cannot, a priori, find something that would meet the interests of only one country.
Щось таке, щоб, відповідало інтересам лише якоїсь однієї країни. Так, Росія хоче, так, Росія...
Yes, Russia wants to, it tries to, but what happens? The result is the same commonality that does not oblige anyone to anything, and thus, everything remains as it is. Therefore, frankly speaking, in political terms, I think this BRICS has very, very few prospects, because too many different countries are uniting. In economic terms, maybe...
країни об'єднуються. В економічному, можливо, вони будуть намагатися домовитися про якісь...
They will try to agree on some specific economic projects, but will there be a coincidence of interests here again?
Але чи знову ж таки тут буде співпадіння інтересів? Це надзвичайно велике питання.
So I would look at all this very, very calmly. But the fact that Guterres appeared there is evidence that the United Nations is involved.
Оце свідчення того, що Організація Об'єднаних Націй, якою вона задумувалася...
As it was conceived after the Second World War, has de facto ceased to exist. Because if the head of this organization goes, so to speak, hug a war criminal, it means that such an organization simply has to cease to exist. It should be either refounded or simply replaced by another organization. And this is what I think we will be talking about.
Або перезаснованою, або просто на її місце має бути побудована інша. І саме про це, я думаю, йтиметься після...
After the defeat of the Russian Federation in the war, it is currently waging against Ukraine.
Зараз веде проти України.
The UN is already making excuses. The deputy said that the meeting was important for cooperation with the BRICS countries, which represent about half of the world's population, so Guterres could not miss it. But at the same time, let me remind you that Guterres, for example, missed the summit in Switzerland. The peace summit organized by Ukraine was also attended by, in my opinion, more than half of the world. So for some reason he did not come there. That's what we're talking about. which, in my opinion, is evidence that his personal position is false.
І те, що ця організація сьогодні, попри те, що той самий Гутерреш отримує свою зарплату за рахунок внесків всіх країн, вона перетворюється в...
And the fact that this organization today, despite the fact that Guterres receives his salary from contributions from all countries, is turning into a bad Red Cross because it cannot make any key political decisions. The maximum it can do is to help in humanitarian terms in certain hotspots of the planet, and even then, not always. When it came to the shooting of our heroes in Olenivka, neither the Red Cross nor the UN appeared for some reason. Why? Well, because the bandits forbade them to approach there. That's basically the whole position of these organizations. So I think that with this step, Guterres really covered up for the UN. I'm afraid that after Russia's defeat in this war, I think that the United Nations organization should really be refounded, because nobody really needs such an organization. But Erdogan, why is he coming to see Putin? At the same time, we know how he is trying to establish ties with the Western world. Here, there are calculations, and I think they are quite obvious. Turkey, despite everything, is gaining weight in this Turkic-speaking world. And coming to Kazan is, as they say, just what the doctor ordered. It's great to show that we are not strangers here. We are not just neighbors, but a country that wants to influence the situation. We will see what is happening here, in Russia, and around us, and we will follow our own line. This is a traditional Turkish position, yours and ours, to make money on one side and the other. This is, well, a fairly traditional line in Turkey, especially since you see that the Turks are resentful of the European Union. Because it does not want Turkey to be part of it. And how can Turkey be included if the rather obvious human rights in this country are somehow pushed into the background? So it turns out that Turkey has a formal reason to say, well, you see, you don't invite us, others invite us, or we see some reason for it ourselves. So we will be both here and there. This is the Eastern foreign policy. Volodymyr, we said that the participants of the summit have different views on the end of the war in Ukraine and other issues, so they are unlikely to come to an agreement. But Xi Jinping said that India has joined the group of Friends of Peace, led by China and Brazil. He said this at the BRICS summit in Kazan, and noted that China, Brazil, and a number of countries from the global south have created a group of Friends of Peace. It aims to unite voices that advocate for the earliest possible de-escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. Why China is pushing its so-called peace plan? And how did India get involved? Look, China has its own national interests, as in this situation, as in any other. To be honest, I don't think it's going to take into account the position of this criminal that you're showing now very much. But this is all very labile and subject to change, depending on the situation that will take place on the battlefield.
Це все дуже лабільно і дуже піддається змінам в залежності від тієї ситуації, яка відбуватиметься на полі.
Let's imagine that Ukraine receives appropriate assistance from the United States, and the situation on the battlefield changes dramatically in favor of Ukraine. Russia could actually suffer a defeat, especially if we take into account the processes that are beginning to take place within the country itself.
Ті процеси, які починають відбуватися всередині самої країни і так далі. Ну от в якій ситуації опиняється Китай? Якщо він
What situation does China find itself in if it avoids this public peacefulness? And so he says, look, I have always been in favor of a peaceful, democratic solution to all problems. We have always called for peace as soon as possible. We offered our plans with the Brazilians and with someone else, with anyone. They didn't listen to us then, but we were still on the side of the countries that were in favor of peace. Thus, China has a certain alibi. And what is India doing? India, like China, is now making money off of Russia. And if that is the case, then they need to pretend that they are the best and greatest peacekeepers in the world, only at the expense of Ukraine. In fact, both China and India are, unfortunately, very close in this regard. And in this context, their political goals at this stage are the same, to show themselves as countries fighting for peace. These are the countries that are in the forefront of wanting to end the war, not by punishing the aggressor, but by punishing the victim of aggression, and calling on them to accept the fact that part of their territory is occupied. In return for this, they receive Russian oil and other resources, which they profit from. It is India that resells the oil, which is transformed into petroleum products for Europe at Indian refineries. It makes good money and builds its current line on this. So again, everything is quite clear here. The only question is how much of this position will be enough for India and China. If Russia starts to collapse, I think
цілком зрозуміло. Питання лише наскільки цього всього цієї всієї позиції у Індії і Китаю вистачить. Бо якщо Росія почне валитися,
very quickly, the situation will change in the opposite direction. During the summit, BRICS also called for preventing the escalation of the war in Ukraine. He noted that this conflict is dragging on, and we must firmly adhere to three principles: no expansion of the geography of hostilities, no escalation, and no provocations that increase tensions. He also emphasized the need for early de-escalation. Xi called for an end to the policy of adding fuel to the fire. This is interesting, because isn't it Russia that is adding fuel to the fire at China's expense? Isn't it with China's consent that North Korean troops are going to die for Putin? Regarding the latter, there may indeed be some nuances here, although we have talked about this many times.
Тут можливі справді якісь певні нюанси, хоча ми з вами про це вже Настя неодноразово говорили. Північна Корея
North Korea is sitting on such a short chain from China that if China wanted to, very quickly all these North Korean appetites would be stopped. But now Russia has emerged, and it can really feed this North Korean regime with money, food, and all other resources.
Але зараз з'явилася Росія, яка справді може підгодовувати цей північно-корейський режим грошима, продовольством і всіма іншими речами, які
that North Korea needs today in exchange for what we have now.
обмін на те, що ви зараз маємо.
China, of course, is probably not very happy in this context. But on the other hand, it can take the position of an outside observer and say, look, we are still calling for peace, we are against escalation. And what's happening between Russia and North Korea is, sorry, none of our business. If they have agreed to this, what can we do? This is also a cynical, I would say, mean-spirited position that can at least be taken by China as the basis for positioning a country that wants a peaceful settlement. Whether this will last, again, depends, I repeat, on what happens on the battlefield.
Чи це буде знову-таки довго тривати, залежить, повторюю ще раз, від того, що відбуватиметься на
If we have enough weapons, if we have the ability to use them where necessary, Believe me, as soon as the situation on the battlefield begins to change, everyone, including even this crazy North Korean dictator, will quickly realize that they need to pull back. In the meantime, you can safely donate 10,000, 12,000, or however many he throws into this meat grinder, in exchange for Russia giving North Korea economic or financial assistance. Or even more so, he could transfer technologies that North Korea does not have yet. I mean, technologies for nuclear weapons. And from the point of view of the North Korean dictator, this can work for Putin as well as for him. The price of a human life is equal to 0.0 of any Korean or non-Korean currency.
І це цілком, з точки зору північно-корейського диктатора, зараз може працювати, ну, як і для Путіна, так і для нього. Ціна людського життя дорівнює 0,0 будь-якої корейської і некорейської валюти.
An interesting paradox is that the Western position on military assistance to Ukraine is largely driven by fears. If Ukraine's armed forces succeed on the battlefield, it could lead to the collapse of the Russian Federation, which in turn would create the problem of uncontrolled nuclear weapons. But we see that this is already happening. In particular, these nuclear weapons are spreading to all other countries, and Belarus already has them, and North Korea probably has them. Nuclear technology will appear, at least. Do you think the West can reconsider its geopolitical goals in this situation? Well, it would be logical, of course, that there would be no movement until the presidential election.
Президентських виборів жодних рухів не буде, тому що демократи не хочуть давати пас Трампу в тому, щоб їх звинуватили в тому, що вони є партією війни.
Because the Democrats do not want to give Trump a pass on being accused of being the party of war. What will happen after the elections in 2 weeks? Well, let's wait and see. But I will tell you frankly that I have rather pessimistic expectations. So far, the West has not demonstrated decisive steps, has not demonstrated leadership where it should be.
Рішучих кроків не демонструє лідерства там, де воно повинно було б бути. І в цьому плані, ви знаєте, мені більше подобається.
In this regard, I prefer the position of Israel, which, without even telling the Americans or other Western countries about its plans, simply draws the line that it sees as correct.
Чи іншим західним країнам просто проводить ту лінію, яка йому видається правильною. І як ми бачимо, вона є результативною. Знищити лідерів Хамас, будь ласка, знищити інфраструктуру терористичної організації, будь ласка, провести
As we can see, it is effective. Destroy Hamas leaders. Please, destroy the infrastructure of the terrorist organization. Please, take certain tough actions, please. This means that the country is defending itself against practical attacks on itself, on its security, and so on.
Таку саму логіку мали наші західні партнери, то, повірте, вже давно б не було теми про ядерний потенціал Ірану. Ну, тому що місця, де...
So you see, if our Western partners had the same logic, believe me, there would have been no topic about Iran's nuclear potential a long time ago. The places where the relevant work is being done are very well known to everyone.
Загравати з цим божевільним диктатором, а треба просто проводити відповідні акції, які б унеможливили те, що сьогодні вже Північна Корея...
The Americans are well aware of what is happening with North Korea, and there is no need to flirt with this crazy dictator. We just need to take appropriate actions that would make it impossible for North Korea to have what it has today. And it has ballistic missiles. It most likely has nuclear weapons, which, however, can hardly be seriously used yet, because the launch vehicles are either starting or falling down near the launch site. But with this cooperation with Russia now, such things can be accelerated. The Americans can wait for North Korean missiles to reach California if they think that this is a normal development. Well, then we just need to understand that our American friends are still sitting somewhere in the clouds. I don't know where. and think that the situation can resolve itself. Unfortunately, we can see it all over the place. That it will only get worse, not better. Today I was surprised that Austin recognized the presence of North Korean troops at training grounds in Russia. Budanov notes that North Korean troops may appear in the Kursk region, but they are unlikely to become active before the presidential election. You mentioned Israel, which decides its own actions. Can it be more effective? I recall the words about the possibility of Ukraine developing nuclear weapons. Is it possible to do this, or should we not do it, because it could lead to an Iranian scheme? Well, I'm starting from your thesis that Austin has finally recognized what Budanov was saying a few days ago. But here I was more interested in the reaction of South Korea. Officials of this country said that we are considering sending our specialists to Ukraine. And here I think that this will be a very good example for our Western partners.
Президента Франції Макрона, який говорив про таку можливість ще на початку цього року.
I think we should mention the initiative of French President Macron, who spoke about this possibility at the beginning of this year. It sounded a little bit like a possibility then, but it didn't develop. So I think that if this fact, the presence of South Korean military personnel on the territory of Ukraine, is confirmed, then I think that you have to be a completely scared politician to say that we are just very concerned again. Then we need to make real decisions and make them immediately, because this means that Russia is involving other countries in proving its aggressive war. Against this backdrop, attempts by some Western politicians to say that, well, yes, this is bad and that's it, will not work anymore.
Відносно ж теми про ядерну зброю.
As for the topic of nuclear weapons, I think that we shouldn't push this topic now, because it is very sensitive around the world.
Педалювати цю тему. Тому що вона дуже гостро сприймається в усьому світі, і якщо ми захочемо її продовжувати далі, це означатиме, що ми налаштуємо проти себе не лише наших безпосередніх
If we want to continue it further, it will mean that we will turn against us not only our immediate allies and partners, but also the countries of this so-called South. Look, China, in this context, has very clearly and firmly stated that it is against even hints that nuclear weapons could be used under any circumstances.
І це сигнал доволі серйозний, в тому числі і для Росії.
This is a very serious signal, including for Russia. Therefore, if we start this dialogue now, so to speak, in quotation marks and these things, I'm afraid it will be very difficult to explain politically why. Instead, we need to push for a formal invitation for now to invite Ukraine to NATO.
Надзвичайно важливим політичним сигналом для Москви, який означатиме, що
I think that this will be an extremely important political signal for Moscow, which will mean that you in Muscovy need to forget about the fact that you will be ruling Ukraine. The practical process will look a little bit different. It's not going to be a quick and easy ride. It's going to have to happen after the war is over.
Це ще раз підтвердить, що наш шлях до НАТО є справді остаточним і безповоротним. А вже що ми будемо робити в рамках...
But this will once again confirm that our path to NATO is truly final and irrevocable. What will we do within NATO? well, that's when we will think about it. I think the formula that the Israeli military often likes to use when they say that we don't have nuclear weapons, of course, but if we really need to, we will use them, will work. But if we talk about the invitation to NATO, won't this provoke the Russian Federation on the contrary? To be more aggressive, to use even more troops, to increase some kind of cooperation with other dictatorships, and to seize more territory of Ukraine. Because we realize that this process of joining NATO will be very long. What else should we endure to understand the possible escalation? It seems to me that Russia is already using everything but nuclear weapons. I believe that in the context of nuclear weapons, Putin and his entourage will not risk taking this fatal step, as it will lead to the end of Russia. Thus, Muscovy no longer has any other tools of influence and intimidation. Therefore, we should not be afraid of another escalation, because they will bring 20,000 instead of 12,000. But if the West helps us, let's say with drones, and here I would like to point out that this really should be a huge help for us from the United States. I mean, this package of $800 million for the development of our drones.
Мені здається, може в дуже близькій перспективі створити реальну перевагу.
This step, I think, can create a real advantage for Ukraine in this area over Russia in the very near future. And we see what our drones are every day. And I think that if this program is implemented, plus of course what we are doing ourselves, we can have a very, very serious and positive impact on the course of hostilities.
Дуже серйозно і дуже позитивно для нас повпливати на хід бойових дій. Відтак, все інше...
And so everything else will be an important element of this break in the war. And Russia has nothing to oppose, I repeat, except for scaremongering about how we will burn Washington, Paris, Brussels, or not to mention Kyiv.
Про те, що ми спепелимо Вашингтон, там Париж, Брюссель, там чи не говорячи вже про Київ.
Volodymyr, thank you for your information and participation in the interview. I wish you a good and relaxing day. Volodymyr Ohryzko, Ukrainian diplomat and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine 2007 to 2009. Like this stream, write comments, and share the video so that more people can see it. Thank you, everyone.